Ukrainian President Zelensky recently did a 60-minute interview where he said they are, quote, fighting for real with a nuclear state that threatens to destroy the world through a possible World War III scenario. Now, before I show you some other clips from this interview with Zelensky, we first have to look at some other alarming signs of the times that could be pointing to the last days. The recent increase of natural disasters and earthquakes and parts of the world that aren't accustomed to experiencing these sorts of things. There's also what others have historically dismissed as conspiracy theories around UFO sightings and extraterrestrial speculation, with even testimonies before Congress of, quote, non-human biologics. Then there's the radical advancement of AI potentially taking over certain jobs in the short term and possibly leading to a dystopian scenario where the robots become sentient. There also seems to be an increase of supernatural experiences where different people are claiming to having encounters with other spirits, ghosts, or full-on demonic attacks being delivered all across different pockets of church and secular culture. And also, what seems to be more and more extreme weather, and the world seemingly becoming warmer and warmer. Now, later in this video, we're going to look at two different passages, both from the Old and the New Testament, that may help us make sense of some of these modern phenomenon. But first, let's take a look at what Ukrainian President Zelensky said regarding the possibility of World War III and how Putin may be a modern-day Hitler-like figure.
If Ukraine falls, Putin will surely go further. What will the United States of America do when Putin reaches the Baltic states, when he reaches the Polish border? He will. This is a lot of money. We have a lot of gratitude. What else must Ukraine do for everyone to measure our huge gratitude? We are dying in this war. Look, if Ukraine falls, what will happen in 10 years? Just think about it. If the Russians reach Poland, what's next? A third world war? What will it take? Another 70 billion?
Now, some of the pushback to this will be that this is just President Zelensky doing what he's doing in terms of asking America for more money and more involvement in this war with Russia. And when Zelensky was pressed in this interview about what it would actually require to prevent such a thing from happening and ultimately help Ukraine win the war, his answer may shock you. But first, let's go to the book of Revelation. In chapter 16, there are 7 different plagues or disasters laid out that many scholars believe are depicting what is going to happen in the last days. Then I heard a mighty voice from the temple say to the 7 angels, "Go your ways and pour out on the earth the 7 bowls containing God's wrath." So the first angel left the temple and poured out his bowl on the earth, and horrible malign sores broke out on everyone who had the mark of the beast and who worshipped the statue. Then the second angel poured out his bowl on the sea, and it became like the blood of a corpse, and everything in the sea died. Then the third angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and springs, and they became blood. And I heard the angel who had authority over all water saying, "You are just, O Holy One, who is and always was, because you have sent these judgment. Since they shed blood of your holy people and your prophets, you gave them the blood to drink. It is their just reward." And I heard a voice from the altar saying, "Yes, O Lord Almighty, your judgments are true and just." Then the fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, causing it to scorch everyone with its fire. Everyone was burned by the blast of the heat, and they cursed the name of God who had control over all these plagues. They did not repent of their sins and turn to God and give him glory. Then the fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and the kingdom was plunged into darkness. His subjects ground their teeth in anguish, and they cursed the God of heaven for their pains and sores, but they did not repent of their evil deeds and turn to God. Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great Euphrates River, and it dried up so the kings from the east could march the armies toward the west without hindrance. And I saw 3 evil spirits that looked like frogs leap from the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophets. They were demonic spirits who work miracles and go out to all the rulers of the world to gather them for battle against the Lord and the great judgment of God the Almighty. Now, to be fair, I don't know if some of this stuff is symbolic or literal. I mean, different scholars have argued about this for thousands of years. But what I do know is that recently there was a natural phenomenon that could be foreshadowed in this passage.
Millions in Syria and Iraq are facing water shortages as the region's longest river, the Euphrates, dries up.
The Euphrates River, a symbol of ancient Mesopotamia, holds a remarkable history. It nurtured the world's first civilizations like the Sumerians and Babylonians, stretching 1,740 miles from Turkey to the Persian Gulf. In the past, it flowed alongside the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and attracted great leaders like Alexander the Great. But now, It's drying up, revealing hidden tunnels and treasure.
Pretty spooky that Revelation 16:12 says that the Euphrates River will dry up. Is this the same Euphrates River? Look, I don't know. But what's described next in Revelation chapter 17 about the great prostitute of Babylon and the world's leaders committing adultery with you may be the most shocking yet. But I believe there's another passage with a prophetic word for many of us that will finally introduce a glimmer of hope. But first, let's go back and see how President Zelensky responded when asked point blank, what more does he want from the United States to fight off the Russians?
What will it take? Another 70 billion? I don't have an answer. The whole world has to decide whether we want to stop Putin or whether we want to start the beginning of a world war. We can't change Putin. Russian society has lost the respect of the world. They elected him and re-elected him and raised a second Hitler. They did this. We cannot go back in time, but we can stop it here.
So Zelensky thinks that we collectively need to come together and stop Russia, because stopping Russia, from his perspective, will ultimately stop another world war. Now, before I get into this passage about what I believe God may be saying to you and I about what we personally should be doing in times like these, I first want to go back to Revelation chapter 17. This is specifically about the great prostitute of Babylon. One of the seven angels who had poured out the seven bowls came out over and spoke to me. Come with me, he said, and I will show you the judgment that is going to come on the great prostitute who rolls over many waters. The kings of the world have committed adultery with her, and the people who belong to this world have been made drunk by the wine of her immorality. Notice that verse 2 here doesn't say that it's any one specific nation or any one specific group or any one specific leader, that it's the kings of the world. Now, verse 3 goes on to say, so the angel took me in the spirit into the wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that had 7 heads and 10 horns, and blasphemies against God were written all over it. The woman wore purple and scarlet clothing and beautiful jewelry made of gold and precious gems and pearls. In her hand, she held a gold goblet full of obscenities and the impurities of her immorality. A mysterious name was written on her forehead, Babylon the Great, mother of all prostitutes and obscenities in the world. I could see that she was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, who were witnesses for Jesus, and I stared at her in the complete amazement. We see the prostitute of Babylon as someone that had influence over the kings of the nations and was drunk off the blood of God's very own people. So this got me thinking about a couple other passages that reference Babylon. Now, many scholars have debated if Babylon in the book of Revelation is about the Roman Empire and these things having had already happened before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, or if this is foreshadowing some of the things that are happening today. But what I do know is that the children of Israel once upon a time were actually held captive in exile in Babylon, specifically in the book of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah. So if America or a one world government could be emerging from the World Economic Forum or the United Nations, or I don't know, perhaps what God said to the children of Israel in the book of Jeremiah while they were exiled in Babylon could be applicable to God's heart for how we as God's children should behave today. Check out what Jeremiah 29 verse 4 through 7 says to the children of Israel while they are exiled in Babylon. Verse 4, this is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to all the captives he has exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem. Verse 5, build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat the food they produce. Marry and have children, then find spouses for them so that you may have many grandchildren. Multiply, do not dwindle away, and work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. Now, I'm going to give you 2 free resources at the end of this video to equip you in how we could be living this out today. But first, let's briefly break down this passage. Notice that ultimately God is provident over the children of Israel being sent as captives into Babylon from Jerusalem. These people were captives in enemy territory, but his instruction to them is astonishing. Verse 5, build homes and plan to stay. So many Christians today have what they think is their hell insurance and they're ready to go to heaven and be zapped up with the rapture. But when the children of Israel are in exile, they're told to build homes and plan to stay. They're then told to plant gardens and eat the food they produce. When you plant a garden, you don't reap the harvest immediately. So God is telling the children of Israel to build homes, to have a plan to stay, to plant gardens, thinking for the next season, and eat the food they produce. And check it out, verse 6 is even crazier. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that they may have many grandchildren. Multiply and do not dwindle away. He is telling them to think multi-generationally. If you hadn't heard, right now, the birth rates in America are actually plummeting. That is some of the tension that China is going through right now because of their wicked one-child policy that was going until 2015. And when birth rates decrease, it actually creates a huge burden on the economy. And with all the climate alarmism and all the disparities in the economy, many people are foregoing having children. Some people are pushing it out further and further. Others are openly saying they just don't even want to be married or have kids. But if we're to take this passage as applicable to God's people today, we are encouraged, just like in the book of Genesis, to marry and have children. And not just marry and have our own children, but also think about their children and think about our grandchildren and to ultimately multiply so that we would not dwindle away. In verse 7, by far, arguably, the most controversial verse in this entire discussion, and work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. God is again telling them that he ultimately is sovereign and provident, that he ultimately sent them into exile, yet they are to work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. All of this sounds super counterintuitive. God sends his people into enemy territory, much like what the world probably feels like to us Christians today, yet he doesn't tell them to flee and be scared and to live in fear. Instead, he commands them to build homes, to think multi-generationally, to plant gardens, to have family, to have grandchildren. And perhaps, in light of everything that's going on today, instead of consuming ourselves with all the variables we can't control, what we should be doing is applying what Jeremiah 29 instructs God's people to do while they're being held captive in Babylon. So we can't control whether there's going to be World War III or whether the United States government is going to get behind Zelensky in Ukraine or if Putin is going to get overthrown by someone within the Russian government. You and I can't control any of those things. But what we can control is our daily decisions to continue pressing into Jesus and living our lives in a way that brings honor and glory to him. And I promised you 2 free gifts at the end of this video. So the first one is a free course I put together with my Christian therapist about freedom forming habits. So many Christians are living addicted and stuck. And so we put together mastermyhabits.com, a completely free course to help you develop freedom forming habits and break away from some of those negative addictions that are perhaps derailing you from walking in the fullness of the freedom that is offered to us in Jesus. And the second is the PDF version of our brand new prayer journal. Developing the discipline for prayer has been one of the greatest things that I've ever done. And what I do is write down my prayers in a physical journal like the one I designed with specific prompts, ultimately being more likely to remember them and see the hand of God. And right now we're giving away the free PDF version of the exact prompts that I use in the physical version of this at blessgodpdf.shop. So take advantage of those free resources, or if you like to see the time that Joe Rogan read the book of Revelation live on his podcast, check that out here. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.